On Sunday, the 8th of June, 1940, more than 1,500 sailors perished in the Norwegian Sea when the Royal Navy's carrier, HMS Glorious, and 2 destroyers vanished under the guns of German battlecruisers, a catastrophe whose causes, lack of air patrols, empty skies, and fatal command choices, still raise the question: how could a carrier be surprised in daylight with no aircraft ready to fly? The story begins in the late spring of 1915, when the Admiralty ordered a trio of fast, shallow-draft ships designed for a Baltic strategy. At Armstrong's High Walker Yard on the River Tyne, workers laid down Glorious in May of that year, launching her on Thursday, the 20th of April, 1916, and completing her as a large light battlecruiser that could run fast but carried thin armor and a specialized mission set that would soon be overtaken by the war's realities and the armistice that followed in November 1918. In the final phase of the First World War, she served with cruiser squadrons and in the Second Battle of Heligoland Bight, fought on Sunday the 17th of November, 1917. Ships of her class took part in the tense North Sea sparring that tested gunnery, scouting, and speed. In the gray waters off Germany's fortified coastline, a harbinger of the fast-wing tactics navies would later seek from aviation at sea. After the guns fell silent, the Washington Naval Treaty reshaped fleets. Glorious was selected for conversion in the 1920s from a battlecruiser hull into an aircraft carrier, trading big guns for flying decks and hangars in a bid to meet treaty tonnage limits while gaining a platform for naval air power that would define the next war's oceans. Work stretched over the decade as designers grafted a full-length flight deck, twin hangars, arresting gear, and aircraft elevators onto a hull never intended for flying operations, a bold compromise that gave capacity for roughly 40 to 50 aircraft, but retained structural legacies that affected stability, wind over deck handling, and damage control, traits that mattered in routine training and would matter even more in battle. When recommissioned as a carrier in late 1929 and early 1930, Glorious embarked early fleet air arm types like the Fairey Flycatcher, Blackburn Dart, and Blackburn Ripon, and Fairey 3F reconnaissance aircraft, a mixed group that reflected the interwar transition from wood and fabric biplanes to sturdier torpedo and reconnaissance machines designed for the rolling deck and salt air. Through the 1930s, she cycled squadrons and roles. From 1933 until a mid-decade refit and beyond, she carried 802 Squadron with Hawker Nimrod and Hawker Osprey fighters, and later a dozen Gloucester Sea Gladiators, while torpedo and spotter units, 812 and 823 squadrons, flew Blackburn Ripon, Blackburn Baffin, Fairey 2 1F, Fairey Seal, and eventually the Blackburn Swordfish, the slow but reliable torpedo biplane that became synonymous with British carrier strikes. In May 1936, 825 Squadron converted to the Blackburn Swordfish, consolidating her strike arm into aircraft that could haul torpedoes and bombs from a short deck, but needed calm deck handling and generous time to spot, warm, and launch, constraints that would become deadly if surprised. Her peacetime routine was not without danger, as shown by a fog-bound collision in the Strait of Gibraltar on Wednesday, the 1st of April 1931, when she struck the French liner Florida in thick mist after launching aircraft. Even outside combat, ship handling and aviation recovery in poor visibility exposed the ever-present risks of carrier operations and the need for rigorous procedures and clear air group coordination to prevent tragedy. In the late 1930s, as Europe edged toward war, Glorious split time between the Mediterranean and home fleet, honing flight routines and ship drills, while the fleet air arm adjusted to a doctrine that still treated carriers as scouts and strike adjuncts to battleships rather than as capital assets demanding layered defense and constant air cover, a doctrinal lag that would loom over the Norwegian crisis in 1940. When Germany invaded Norway in early April 1940, British carriers and cruisers surged north. Glorious joined operations off the Norwegian coast during the campaign that followed the landings of Tuesday, the 9th of April, 1940, supporting evacuations, providing fighter cover and flying reconnaissance in a maritime environment of mountainous coasts, unpredictable weather and long northern daylight that could aid defender yet expose ships to sudden contact. During those hectic weeks, her air group reflected wartime improvisation. Swordfish squadrons flew anti-ship and patrol tasks, while Royal Air Force fighter units were ferried and, in rare and risky operations, recovered to the carrier, despite not being designed for deck landing. Most notably Hurricanes and Gladiators executing innovative but hazardous recoveries that demanded precise deck handling and calm seas, practices that bought strategic flexibility at the price of heightened operational risk. By early June, as Allied forces withdrew from northern Norway, German Navy planners launched Operation Juno, a bold sortie by the battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, supported by other units under Vice Admiral Wilhelm Marschall, intended to harry Allied evacuations and strike troopships and escorts as British strength shifted south and west, a window of opportunity that would place a fast surface raiding force athwart homebound British formations. The German force cleared Kiel on Tuesday, the 4th of June, 1940, aimed for refueling, and then an attack toward Harstad on the night of Saturday to Sunday, the 8th to 9th of June, plans that moved under cover of uncertainty as British commanders focused on troop movements and the protection of high-value transports rather than an aggressive carrier screen built around constant airborne eyes. At first light on Saturday, the 8th of June, 1940, Glorious obtained permission to detach from the main force and proceed with only 2 destroyers, HMS Ardent and HMS Acasta, toward Scapa Flow, a decision reflecting urgent tasks, tight fuel and logistics schedules, and an underestimation of surface raider threat on a day of long clear Arctic light, yet a choice that removed her from the layered protection that a full escort group and air patrols might have offered. The detach order placed a large carrier, light in organic defense and dependent on aircraft for surveillance, in open water with minimal screen. While standard doctrine emphasized a combat air patrol over the force, Glorious steamed with no fighters airborne and no ready deck load spotted for launch, a posture that, in northern waters thick with possibility, left her dependent on bridge lookouts and the slender eyes of 2 destroyers to detect threats beyond the horizon. Meanwhile, to the north and west, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, cruising at high speed during Operation Juno, sighted smoke on the horizon and altered to intercept. Their heavy guns and superior surface search capability made them deadly to any ship caught without air warning, and within an hour, the German squadron closed the range to visual identification of a carrier and 2 escorts weaving in the swell. Shortly after 4 in the afternoon, British lookouts gained sight of the Germans, and HMS Ardent was dispatched to investigate, a brave run that placed a small destroyer within the envelope of heavy secondary batteries. At 4:20, Glorious went to action stations and ordered 5 swordfish to the flight deck. But with no combat air patrol in the sky and no spotted fighter section ready to fly, the carrier was still minutes from any meaningful air screen, and those minutes would be consumed by the first salvos from German heavy guns at long range. At 4:27, Scharnhorst opened fire on Ardent at roughly 16,000 yards, forcing the destroyer to turn away under a smokescreen while loosing torpedoes. Ardent even scored a hit with her 4.7-inch guns, but repeated bursts from the German cruiser's secondary batteries shattered the small ship, which sank at around 5:25 in the afternoon after a gallant fight that bought time but could not change the odds. At 4:32, Scharnhorst shifted fire to Glorious, and 6 minutes later, on the 3rd salvo, landed an 11-inch shell at approximately 26,000 yards that penetrated the forward flight deck and detonated in the upper hangar, setting off fires, destroying 2 swordfish being prepared, and blowing a hole in the deck that prevented any aircraft from taking off, while splinters damaged a boiler casing and temporarily dropped steam pressure. Technical blows that removed the carrier's only path to self-defense. At 4:58, a second shell smashed the homing beacon above the bridge, killing or wounding the captain and many bridge personnel, further degrading command and control amid smoke, flame, and shrapnel. For about 20 minutes, the smokescreen laid by Ardent obscured the German sight picture, temporarily easing the pounding, but at 5:20, the German gunners struck again. This time in the center engine room, knocking down speed and forcing Glorious into a slow port circle as she took a starboard list. A wounded giant unable to outrun or outmaneuver the gunfire that walked its way inward with each measured salvo. HMS Acasta, the lone surviving destroyer, weaved between splashes to maintain a smokescreen and then emerged to attack with torpedoes, launching 2 volleys around 5:34 and scoring a devastating hit on Scharnhorst abreast the after turret. A blow that would later force the German squadron to break off from further destruction and retire for repairs. A single torpedo run that saved other Allied ships downrange, even as it could not save the ships already in the trap. Acasta also landed a hit with her 4.7-inch guns before being riddled by heavy fire and sinking around 6:20 in the evening, guns still firing as the crew fought to the last. With the destroyer gone and damage mounting, the German battlecruisers closed within roughly 16,000 yards and continued pounding until about 5:40, before the carrier, burning and listing, finally rolled and slid beneath the waves at approximately 6:10 in the evening, near latitude 68 degrees 38 minutes north and longitude 3 degrees 50 minutes east, leaving debris, rafts, and hundreds of men in icy water under a sun that would not set. In the attack's aftermath, survivors later estimated that nearly 900 men abandoned ship, a heartbreaking figure given the scant rescue options on an open Arctic sea where exposure could kill in hours. The damaged German force, concerned about further contact and unaware that no British heavy cover shadowed the scene, did not stop to pick up survivors and withdrew, leaving the outcome to drift, current, and chance amid a war zone where any pause could attract submarines or aircraft. The Royal Navy, unaware of the disaster until German radio announced it, could not organize timely rescue. Days later, on Monday, the 10th of June, the Norwegian ship Borgund, bound for the Faroe Islands, found men clinging to rafts and pulled aboard several dozen, eventually landing 37 alive at Torshavn, though 2 later died, while another Norwegian vessel, Svalbard II, recovered 5, only to be forced back to occupied Norway by a German aircraft, where 4 survivors became prisoners for 5 years, and a German seaplane rescued 1 more. Grim arithmetic that left the final tally at 40 survivors across the 3 ships and 1,519 dead or missing. A loss rate that ranks among the greatest Royal Navy wartime tragedies. The precise breakdown cited in British accounts lists 1,207 from Glorious, 160 from Acasta, and 152 from Ardent, figures that underscore the human cost, packed into a single June afternoon, an event remembered, studied, and debated, because it exposes how doctrine, readiness, and moment-to-moment command decisions can determine survival as when steel meets fire at sea. Why did this happen? And what was the hidden reason the skies over the carrier were empty? The facts are stark. No combat air patrol was flying when the enemy appeared, no aircraft were spotted and ready on deck for a quick launch, and critical lookout positions, including the crow's nest, were reportedly unmanned as the moment of contact approached, a convergence that removed the carrier's only shield against fast surface raiders and left detection to the narrow field of human eyes on a clear horizon. The Royal Navy's interwar doctrine had not fully adapted carriers for independent operations without strong surface screens and constant airborne scouting. And during the Norwegian campaign, the pressure to evacuate, reposition, and ferry aircraft, such as Hurricanes and Gladiators taken aboard through improvised methods, pushed carriers into tasks that diluted readiness for immediate combat. a tension between ferry duties and fleet air defense that set conditions for vulnerability on that June run toward Flaw. German intent also mattered. Operation Juno deliberately sought to strike isolated British elements and troop movements with fast, heavily armed ships under a commander willing to take calculated risks. And once smoke was sighted on the horizon, the pursuit was swift and relentless, a textbook demonstration that surface raiders could still spring deadly traps in the age of the aircraft carrier if the carrier's eyes were shut. In the longer shadow of the loss, questions and controversy grew as families and sailors asked how a carrier could be detached with so little escort and why no rescue reached the scene for days, while official investigations wrestled with fragmentary survivor testimony and operational secrecy in the middle of an existential war. An Admiralty inquiry convened quickly in June 1940, and later public debate, including parliamentary questions decades on, probed whether the detachment orders reflected fuel constraints, disciplinary proceedings, or operational priorities. Issues often clouded by classified records and the fog of a campaign fought under extreme pressure. Regardless of speculation, the documented operational record captures the core chain. Permission to detach was granted in the early hours of the day. The carrier proceeded with 2 destroyers. Standard air precautions were not maintained. Contact with a fast German raider force occurred in the late afternoon, and heavy gunfire crippled flight operations before any meaningful launch could occur, while the destroyers fought with courage and 1 torpedo from Acasta smashed into Scharnhorst, curtailing further German action and likely sparing additional Allied convoys. A tactical bright spark in a dark episode. That torpedo result also has numbers that matter in evaluating the day's net effect. By damaging Scharnhorst severely enough to compel withdrawal, Acasta's crew prevented the raiders from pressing on toward other British formations, which German planning had considered as potential targets during Juno. A reminder that even in defeat, destroyer aggression could bend the operational curve and save thousands elsewhere. Technical details help explain the tactical outcomes. Glorious could carry up to roughly 40 to 48 aircraft, but aircraft like the Blackburn Swordfish required time to fuel, arm, and spot before launch, and without planes already warmed and chocked at the after end of the flight deck, a carrier under sudden long-range fire was essentially a large, vulnerable target without its primary weapon, the air group, ready to fight. A fact underlined by the first shell that ripped up the forward deck and made further takeoffs impossible. Destroyers armed with 4.7-inch guns and torpedoes had to brave radarless gunnery duels against battlecruisers mounting 11-inch main batteries and numerous 5.9-inch or similar secondaries, a disparity in range and weight of fire that forced Ardent and Acasta into smoke, evasion, and short-range torpedo attacks to achieve any effect. Tactics that worked once at immense cost but could not be repeated. Against a closing pair of heavy ships in good visibility and calm seas, German gunnery found its mark at long range, with the first hit reported at about 26,000 yards, a distance at which a flight deck hole was crippling, while subsequent hits targeted command and machinery spaces, a pattern in line with naval doctrine to blind, slow, and then finish a large target. Such precision reflects both the training of the German crews and the absence of air harassment or smoke thick enough to break spotting, a brittle reality for a carrier unprotected by its own aircraft. Human stories anchor the statistics. Survivors told of Carley, floats thrown over as abandoned ship was ordered, of men leaping for rafts before the carrier's way carried them beyond reach, and of hours and then days in cold swell under a sun that would not set, where exposure felled the young and fit as quickly as the wounded or old. A cruel lesson in the Arctic, where cold steals strength by the minute. One raft's account recalls 7 men alive by the second day before a Norwegian tramp steamer found them and hauled them aboard, proof that chance and endurance decided life or death after the guns fell silent. On the German side, the torpedo hit on Scharnhorst carried its own crew drama, as damaged crews battled flooding and shock under the aft turret, while commanders weighed pursuit against safety, concluding that prudence and the need for repairs trumped the opportunity to destroy more Allied shipping that day, a decision that ended Juno's most dangerous potential phase and marked the battlecruiser for a return to port under escort. For the British, news of the loss came not from fleet signals, but from enemy radio, a bitter insult added to injury that underscored the fog that had settled over a chaotic evacuation theater and pointed to gaps in situational awareness that wartime commanders would spend the next years trying to close with better air patrol routines, radar coverage, and carrier doctrine refined under fire. The legacy of Glorious is therefore a puzzle with clear pieces. An origin in treaty-era improvisation, a conversion that created a capable but compromised carrier, an interwar career that mixed training, mishap, and adaptation, and a wartime end shaped by decisions and doctrines that failed to keep aircraft aloft and threats at bay on a day when vigilance meant survival. Each piece fits the timeline and the data, even as debate endures about deeper motives for detachment and the speed of official reckoning with the disaster. In the broader context of World War II at sea, the loss sits alongside other early war shocks that taught navies to harden habits. Carriers must fly constant combat air patrols, keep a deck load ready, and treat any open ocean as a hunting ground where surface raiders, submarines, and aircraft can appear without warning. Lessons written in names and numbers, and in the long list of those who did not return from the latitudes north of Norway in June 1940. The deadliness of that lesson is measured not only in the 1,519 lives lost, but also in the doctrine that changed afterward, as British carrier forces learned to integrate fighters, radar pickets, and disciplined air routines, even in the most mundane transits, a transformation that helped later carriers survive in the Atlantic and Mediterranean, where the next test would come. Today, the final positions and the casualty figures remain fixed points, while the memory of Ardent and Acasta's charges, and of a single torpedo that bit into Scharnhorst, stand as proof that courage can strike even in disaster. Yet the central riddle, how could a carrier sail home without the shield of its own aircraft, persists as a cautionary secret in naval history. The hidden reason made simple by hindsight, but hard in the moment. When air is a ship's armor, empty skies are a deadly flaw.